from the Heart.
Hello and welcome back to Horror from the Heart, episode 29. My name is Josh, as always, and today we're here to talk about old cartoons. Well, not just old cartoons, but just cartoons in general. And when I'm talking about cartoons, I'm talking about the cartoons for kids, because you go through some of the previous episodes that I've done. I mean, hell, my first 10 episodes are basically an explanation of what I'm trying to do with everything on this podcast. And you go back to those, and I've kind of talked a little bit about cartoons and how horror has integrated itself into pretty much like every aspect of life, including cartoons. Because I'm going to date myself here. I remember watching the original Ghostbusters way back in the day. And when I'm talking about the original Ghostbusters, because I don't know like what your age group is or anything like that, or if you ever saw this cartoon way back in the day. I'm not talking about the real Ghostbusters with like Peter Venkman and Ray Stantz and stuff like that. I'm talking about the original Ghostbusters. It was like a couple of guys with a gorilla, and they would use a bubblegum gun to go chase ghosts down. It actually started out as a live action kind of comedy show and stuff like that, like back in the late 70s, if I remember right. And it ended up becoming a cartoon. And I remember seeing that when I was a kid and being intrigued by it, because it was that, and then the real Ghostbusters came around because there was a lot of contention about that. You didn't really hear about it because we didn't really have the internet back then at all. Internet wasn't even something that existed in those days. But on that though, they had the original Ghostbusters, and that was kind of one of those things that, as far as like kids cartoons, that kind of got me into that foray of horror can be in anything. Then, of course, you progress and you have different types of cartoons that came out like the real Ghostbusters, because the movies were out there, and it was kind of like a progression of from the movies going into the cartoon. And of course, it was a little bit different, but it still had horror elements to it. Now, not just for the factor that, it had monsters in it and things like that, but for the factor that it actually had some pretty freaky characters in there. The ghosts that they had in there could actually be kind of scary in certain ways, especially for a kid. Then you look at other aspects of different cartoons that are out there. I mean, take He-Man, for example. I know they just redid He-Man for Netflix in two different ways, but as a kid, I watched the original He-Man and stuff like that. And even with that, you can kind of see horror elements that are there, because you have these monsters that these masters of the universe are over there trying to fight and, thwart from, conquering whatever it is that they're trying to do. Get Castle Grayskull and have the ultimate power and stuff like that. But then you look at, the monsters that were actually being fought. It was like really interesting. Well, the superheroes had certain powers, and the monsters were more monsters than anything. And I mean, hell, even Skeletor was pretty much, a living body with a skull for a head. But there was tons of different little cartoons that were out back in those days that had horror elements to it. I mean, hell, there was an entire cartoon called Skeleton Warriors. It was literally a group of, these warriors who were fighting these other warriors that were skeletons. And I know a lot of people don't remember that, but they had that kind of stuff. And then they had like the Mad Scientist type of stuff, and so I don't think Mad Scientist was like a cartoon, if I remember right, but I mean, it like had animation for the commercials and stuff like that, but it was like building your own little monsters and stuff like that. Or you go into something like My Pet Monster. We had stuff like that, because there was like a short little animation type of thing that they had for that. There was a movie and everything like that, so it kind of falls into the cartoon type of thing. But anyway, though, there's tons of little cartoons that had little horror elements into it. I mean, hell, you can go all the way back to the old black and white days, some of the early Disney stuff that was out there. I mean, hell, there was even some of the old Merry Melodies and things like that. They had little Halloween episodes. And even in the late 70s, there was Halloween episodes of actual, like, horror-esque type of things. And it wasn't the factor of trying to really get kids to be scared of this stuff, but it was more in that aspect of trying to just entertain. So it was a lot of it was kind of kid friendly. It wasn't until the 80s that we got stuff that was more like had a creepy element to it. Whereas back then, it might have been creepy to kids way back in the day, but I don't know. I couldn't sit back and say that I would think that that would be like a scary thing. But even with that, though, it wasn't, I'd say it was like the 80s or so that we ended up really getting kind of like the scary stuff. I think, me personally, and I'll get into a different subject on that one and with a different podcast episode at some point. But to me, I always thought of the 80s as being a culmination of an advancement in horror and how it has been with things. And we'll kind of dissect that in another episode. But then you progress into like I said, from the 80s into the 90s and stuff like that, and there was more stuff out there. There was even a Tales from the Crypt cartoon that was out there, and I know a lot of people don't know about that one too, but it was Tales from the Crypt Keeper, and I remember watching that too, and it's like, because it was like, it's the Crypt Keeper. How could you not want to sit there and watch the Crypt Keeper? It's like I didn't care if I was older and stuff like that. It was the factor of being able to actually sit there and see the Crypt Keeper in a cartoon form, and of course it's more kid friendly and stuff like that. But it was still in that area of being in horror. And I really kind of found it interesting that we subject our kids to that kind of stuff. Because I know for me, as I've said before, I've been into horror since I was a kid. And it's not because, my family grew up being super into horror. That was just my thing, pretty much. Like, my mom got into horror movies, but not the way I do. My dad really liked horror stuff too, but it wasn't the same way. It wasn't how I get into horror. But a lot of us kids way back in the day did get into the horror stuff. But then you kind of progress again, and you go into certain aspects of more modern cartoons that are out here and stuff like that. And there's still horror elements that are out there in these cartoons. I mean, hell, if you go watch Adventure Time, a lot of it is very kind of like sci-fi-ish, fantasy, but there's horror elements into it. I mean, they have a main character called the Lich, and you look at him and he is creepy. He is just downright creepy. Or then you get into something else like Gravity Falls. And Gravity Falls is nothing but like horror-esque type of stuff. I mean, it's about cryptids, it's about urban legends, it's about all sorts of stuff that's just kind of creepy. Then there's also like other little ones that are out there. I mean, hell, the Monster High Girls had their own little cartoon and stuff like that too. Or Ruby Gloom, which Ruby Gloom was like for little kids, and the whole reason why I know about Ruby Gloom was the factor that it was like my kid liked watching Ruby Gloom. But that one is like, it's cute, but it's within the realm of horror because these were like little monsters and stuff like that. Oh, speaking of the whole aspect of the little monsters and stuff like that too. I mean, hell, look at Nickelodeon. Nickelodeon had a show called Real Monsters. And it was about monsters going around trying to scare people. I mean, hell, Disney did a movie called Monsters Incorporated. So we do kind of push into that horror element in different aspects. But I know for kids, we kind of changed up to make it a little bit more friendly, a little bit more, how to say, like, inclusive in that kind of way. Whereas, like, we're teaching more life lessons than it is an aspect of actually trying to scare. But you look at some of the creatures that they have in this stuff, and that's where you get that horror element, because it's taking that shock and awe of like, oh my god, look at how creepy that looks, or look how out there that thing looks. But I always found it kind of interesting, the way we have integrated horror into pretty much every aspect of life, because I mean, there's not a subject out there that you have that you can't put some kind of horror element into it, or has not had some kind of horror element into it. And kids' cartoons are very, very prevalent in that kind of aspect. I mean, hell, you can go onto Netflix and find sorts of, adult animation that is in the realm of horror. I mean, hell, you go to anime in specific. It's like, I know there's like tons of people who are into anime, and there's tons of people who are not into anime, because some people do the whole like animes for kids, but there's a lot of adult orientated type of stuff. And I don't mean in a sexual way, not at all. I mean like actual like dramas and horror movies and stuff like that. And that'll be a subject for another time on a different episode as well. Maybe we'll do that one on the next episode. We'll talk about anime and horror and stuff like that, because they actually have, I mean, like, oh my god, chef kiss type of thing. some absolutely fantastic horror stuff. So, I mean, if you're one of those people who get into horror and you've never checked out the anime stuff that's out there, we'll talk about that. We'll definitely talk about that. But here it is. We're towards the end of the episode, and I know I've just been kind of go today. But we're at the end of the episode, and again, as always, if you've made it this far, I want to thank you guys very, very much. I want to thank every single one of you who take the time to sit here and listen to me go on and on and on about horror, because I could talk about horror stuff all day long. I mean, hell, that's just what I do. But if you're listening to this on podcast, give me a rating, give me a follow, leave a comment or a review. However it is that you're going to do it. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and the notification bell, so that way you can get updated on my episodes every single week that I put these out. I'm also putting out other content on YouTube, so I've been doing daily TikTok horror facts Monday through Friday, as I've said. So if you got a TikTok, go ahead and check me out over there. If you're not into TikTok, I also post the videos over there onto YouTube. And plus, I've been doing some Reddit stories, trying to get one done at least every single week and have those come out on a Wednesday. So again, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me kind of just continuously ramble on about horror stuff. And I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope that I get to see you guys in the next episode.